Hello and welcome back to the From My Perspective podcast, where I, Jackson McCarty, tell you all the names you need to know in the college football and NFL landscapes that could be changing the football landscape in the very near future. So today, what we're going to be doing before we hop into it, be sure to subscribe, it helps me out a ton. But today, we're going to be looking at all 14 SEC head coaches and ranking them from worst to best. Starting at the very bottom there. And there are a couple in here that gave me some issues. And the reason I wanted to start with the SEC is because I think that this is the most stacked coaching conference. Whenever I went back and ranked all of the conferences by their coaching talent, SEC finished out on top. From the Power Five, but that would have been in the Group of Five too if you factored them in there. So the SEC from top to bottom has a lot of really talented head coaches. Now it is my job today to figure out how they all line out. So starting at the bottom, and I think you can probably take a guess at it. It is Coach Lee for Vanderbilt, and I'm sure he's a great dude. I'm not questioning his character. I'm sure he's got the locker room kind of interested, but you've got such a bad combination of where you're at. You've got issues within the fact that you've only been here for 1 year, so it's inexperience. You hadn't had any coaching jobs before that, so I can't really gamble too much on you, especially coming off a 2-10 season. And and it was a 2-10 season in that debut year, so you don't have a good record. You haven't really had the experience to show that you're one of the guys that can really be relied upon. And, there are a couple of these guys that are higher ranking, and it's because I'm betting on their potential. I can't really do that with Coach Lee right now because of the fact that we haven't really seen a whole lot. It's going to take an absolute miracle to get Vandy where they hope to be, and obviously they don't hope to be where they currently are. I would say that if Vanderbilt could get an 8-win football season, the world would burn down. Like, that's how excited the folks at Vandy would be from that kind of performance. I just don't think that what they have in the building is capable of getting them to that point. And he's notably worse than the rest of the SEC coaches, which is unfair because, like I said at the very beginning of the video, the SEC is absolutely stacked. Like, from the rest of 1 through 13, the rest of these guys could be top 7 coaches, give or take, or have already been top 5 coaches, top 3 coaches in different conferences. So it's really unfair for Coach Lee to have to be labeled as the worst because, again, there are so many talented options. Like our number 13 guy, Brian Harsin. It's not a question of his talent. I'm now worried about, with everything that came out surrounding him, that he can really do anything at Auburn, because I feel like he's almost landlocked in a sense where he has to go up, or he was already having to go up against your A&Ms and your Alabamas and your Georgias, Floridas, whoever recruiting wise. But now he's had these issues that throws another wrench into things with the allegations that he faced. So Brian Harsin, when he was outside of Auburn, he had shown plenty of talent, and that's why he got a big time SEC football job. It's just now that he's gotten there, he has 1 season below 500, and it already looks like it's crumbling because that's the kind of speed you have to have in the SEC, and it's quite daunting, especially for coaches like Harsin, because again, he showed a lot of talent at Arkansas State and Boise State and all of his stops along the way. He showed that he could be a very capable head coach, but it feels like he probably took too big of a jump between jobs, and now he could very well be on his way out early on into his contract. This ranking isn't even particularly reflective of him. Again, I think he could be a pretty good head coach. I think he's better than some of the names that I have above him, most notably, I would say probably 9 through 11. I think he's probably a better coach than those guys, and we'll get to talk about them plenty, but he's in a situation where you can't really project him very high because we don't know what is going to happen at Auburn. You have Zach Calzada coming in at starting quarterback. You just lost Bo Nix, who had been kind of the face of your program for however many years now, and he decided it was time for him to leave. Somebody who I think, even if he does really good at Oregon this year, will still be synonymous with the Auburn football program, and I think that's very emphatic of what's happening at Auburn right now. It's not a good situation by any means, and he's he's stuck. Like, I think his best bet is if he leaves Auburn after this year, goes to one of the Big 10, Big 12 ACC openings, and gets to kind of rebuild himself and take a bigger, or not a bigger job. It certainly won't be bigger than the Auburn job, but if he gets like, and I'm not saying Virginia or Virginia Tech, but an equivalent of one of those schools, and is allowed to still kind of recruit in the South, still get that talent pool, but have some of those pressures and expectations taken off of him, I think he could end up being a very good head coach, especially seeing as all this stuff that was accused, at least to my knowledge, it seemed untrue, or it came out to be untrue. He wouldn't still be at Auburn if there was anything too weighty that came attached with those rumors. So Brian Harsin he's stuck in a bad spot, and that is very reflective in his ranking. Now, somebody who I don't think is stuck in a bad spot necessarily, but I do think is in the wrong spot is Billy Napier, coming from Louisiana to Florida. I think Napier is a good coach. I think if he would have went to LSU, which I think most people were kind of making the pitch for, and you almost could have swapped Napier and Brian Kelly, who is now at LSU. If you would have swapped those over, I think that would have made a ton more sense and would have had both men higher in my rankings, but Napier doesn't feel like the best fit at Florida to me. There's plenty of talent on the roster. Anthony Richardson, everybody is seemingly higher on him than I am. He would be like my, I don't know, 7th, 8th, ninth best quarterback in the SEC right now. I get the potential is there, but he's still a talented quarterback, and again, that potential could help him. The roster is not emptied out by any means. I know you lost Dameon Pierce and a couple different guys, but Florida's got the talent base and the recruiting base that doesn't even particularly matter beyond the first year. And when you combine the fact that it's a first-year head coach at his new school and all this talent, like I can't sit here and say Oklahoma is going to be bad for those reasons and not project that onto Florida. I don't think Florida will be particularly good this year. Probably 6 wins, 7 wins, somewhere in that range. And then that's without looking at their schedule. That's without doing any of that. I just knew that they were not ranked, or they weren't in my ranking predictions, because I just did a full top 25 of everybody. I know that they weren't there and that they weren't even in my honorable mentions. So I think I ended up having them at 6 or 7 wins. I just can't remember off the top of my head. So maybe as he grows into the position, I'll like it more. But in totality, for one, I can't really rank him higher than some of these guys because there's no proven track record in the SEC. Like, that's a bit of like, you won't see there's only one head coach that I can think of that doesn't have a proven, like, long-term track record of at least being able to win football games. That's pretty high up on this list. Outside of that, they are kind of relatively those younger guys, or those guys that are kind of getting their start in the SEC. They're all kind of close to the bottom. Napier has 0 games played in the SEC so far, so that is obviously going to bring him down. But again, I really don't like that fit, and I find it just strange. Like, he almost would have been better staying at Louisiana and waiting to see what jobs opened up next year, in my opinion. So another guy that is coming from the Sun Belt, moving into the SEC. Well, he's already been here 2 years now, 3 years, something along those lines. Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri. I think that while the success hasn't been all that apparent or all that prominent at Missouri, there is something there that at least interests me. And I think Eli Drinkwitz, whenever he got hired from App State, I was fairly vocal within my group of friends. Obviously, I wasn't doing this podcast yet, but I was pretty vocal within my group of friends saying, like, hey, this guy's going to be pretty decent. App State ended up being a really good program underneath him, and now that success has been continued beyond him. But as a whole, him going to Missouri felt good to me, and I still think that there's time for him to grow into that. He might also be another one of those coaches that, kind of like with Harsin, where I said that if he goes to an ACC or a Big 12 or whatever and kind of tries again and, kind of like, okay, I have this big game experience. I know what it takes to win in the SEC. Now let me go out here and learn it and really progress and then return maybe at a later date. Maybe that would be better for him in the end. Right now he feels more locker room oriented and more built around, what goes on in the but whenever you're not on the field than what is on it, because the product that he's turned out to this point has not been particularly great. It is so early into his tenure that I'm not stressed about it. I'm not worried about it. And it's also Missouri. Like, you're the farthest team out from recruiting these Floridas, Georgias, not really Texas. They've got a decent proximity there, but they're kind of the state in the corner, if you will. Like, they're past Arkansas, so it's north of Arkansas, and you've got to kind of work your way down, and you're losing so much traction because if you've got a kid that wants to be home, well, you've got all these schools that are closer that may not necessarily be home, and even if you want to play SEC football, it's, there's less reason to go to Missouri right now. And I think that as time progresses, maybe he finds his footing as a Mark Stoops-esque coach. Maybe he gets a couple 10-win seasons here and there, primarily, your 7-8 win years. But right now it doesn't look like he's fully on track into that position. So, he's got a lot of youth on his side. He'll have time. We'll just have to wait and see. Somebody who is kind of on the opposite end of that recently entered the SEC, but time is not really on his side. He's been in coaching almost as long as I've been alive. Mike Leach at Mississippi State, he comes in next, and quite frankly, I never really believed that his form and variation of the air raid system was going to work in the SEC, and I don't think I've necessarily been proven right or wrong to this point. It's been so short, and he's gotten guys like Will Rogers to put up massive numbers. But to this point, and when you look at all the surrounding factors to it, I don't really see Mississippi State's potential success. You really can't even label it a success right now. I don't know that it's sustainable. I think that they're still way too offensive oriented, and it's too late in the game for Mike Leach, whereas that is very different for some of these other coaches. It's too late for Mike Leach to really learn it and understand it and, put this big emphasis on it, because if he hasn't done it to this point in his career, why should I believe, why should you believe, why should any of us believe that he is going to start doing it now that he's in the SEC? In a weird way, Mike Leach, where he's at currently, knowing what we know about him, is a detriment. With a lot of these other coaches, especially in the SEC, if you've hung around the SEC and we know what we know about you and your experience is something to consider, usually that means you have to be pretty high up on these lists. Mike Leach does not get that. And again, it's very, very strange to me because, these wise are head coaches, and wise is just a synonym for old in most cases, and that does kind of play a factor here. But these guys who have seen tons and tons of football games and been on the sidelines for tons and tons of them and know what it takes to win one, usually that helps you a significant amount. But because of where he entered the SEC, at what time he entered the SEC, it feels like he's maybe a bit too stuck in his ways to really make the needed adjustments to make Mississippi State a 9-win program, a 10-win program beyond, a year or two in a down SEC or, whatever the case may be. I don't really see it. And that's not even a direct statement on the air raid system, because there's another guy here that runs verticals and, very pass-oriented team that is higher up. And, I'm sure you could probably put two and two together there, but we'll get to talk about him before too long. Another young guy that has kind of passed Mike Leach, at least in my eyes, for the SEC, and I think has a better future in the SEC, is Shane Beamer at South Carolina. Now, I didn't realize, because I'll be the first to admit, I'm not deep into the South Carolina trenches as far as football goes and really understanding their program. It's, for very many years of my life, that has not been really something that's needed, because they weren't ever a powerhouse. They weren't somebody to really be feared. And the more I looked into South Carolina since I've started this podcast, the more I do genuinely think Shane Beamer could be a good coach. It's just too early right now for me to do a whole lot of projection for him. And whenever you look at the real top of the SEC and you look at the guys that are at the very pinnacle of it, the top 5, top 6 guys, it's hard to break into those as is. So Shane Beamer, where he's at right now, has set himself up well and could absolutely move. I think he's got the most potential on this list, other than maybe Billy Napier, because if he, hits the ground running, he's going to shoot right to the moon. There's no question about that. Beamer, just in totality, he's very promising. He's got a lot to enjoy, and the thing I find most interesting is the fact that he got Spencer Rattler to come to South Carolina. I myself think it sounds a bit crazy to be like, well, getting a quarterback who, while yes, was a 5-star and this world beater projected to be this golden boy of football, to come to your program after he had all these issues and seemed like a bit of a problem child at Oklahoma. Yeah, it sounds a little weird to be like, oh, you got this superstar, but he wasn't bad. And he had to have, I mean, just tons of options. It wasn't like he was starving for opportunities to play football. I can imagine there were a ton of Power 5 programs that were knocking at his door being like, look, if you come here, we'll try to get you sorted out. But it ended up being South Carolina that landed him. What that tells me is at least that players are buying in to what Beamer is selling. And even this early into his tenure, landing somebody that high profile is only going to tell guys in the future in transfer portals like, hey, if Spencer Rattler, who is this very talented player, if he thought South Carolina was good enough to go to, maybe I shouldn't be so harsh on, maybe I should consider them a little bit more. And so building that core belief, I guess, within players that, they are a formidable or a realistic option to where you go and reboot your career. I think that that's a very good place to be if you're Shane Beamer. So he is among the, kind of the earlier coaches that that are starting to get their legs underneath them, haven't had this long tenure in football. And the next one is a very similar guy. And this is almost like an 8A, 8B situation, but I've got Josh Heupel for Tennessee representing the next spot on this list. And I've not been shy of praising South Carolina, or not South Carolina, but Tennessee. Actually, the video where I called them one of the most underrated football programs in the country for this upcoming season has over 2,000 views. So thank you for that, for everybody who's watched that. But or that's at time of recording. Don't make that number stop. But yeah, Josh Heupel, I think, has done a really good job. And again, this is where that Mike Leach, I'm not really reflecting his system into this because it's not like Heupel runs some conservative style of football. He's very pass oriented. He's very pass heavy. And we've seen that with Hendon Hooker last year. But as Tennessee progresses, I think he's got more time to figure out that defensive side of the ball. He's got a lot more time on his side as opposed to a Mike Leach who, this would almost be like if Mike Leach were planted in the SEC at a younger age as opposed to kind of coming in as his last hurrah. And I'm very interested to see how Heupel's career unfolds in the SEC moving forward. The defensive stuff obviously worries me. My big issue right now is that he is trending more Lincoln Riley or Mike Leach than he is Saban or Kirby Smart or Dabo Swinney. Like, I've been hard on Lincoln Riley, and I'm being hard on Leach for putting him that low on the list. But when you look at it, you have to know, at least understand how to set up both sides of the ball for success. And Tennessee has not exactly done that yet. I think that if they had more depth last year, they would have been a significantly better defense. And I think that they've moved towards figuring that out this year through the transfer portal. But I'm not ready to really, push myself into saying, yeah, this is going to work, and this is how this is fine. Like, we don't know for sure that it's going to be fine. And Tennessee is trying to make an effort to fix it, but I'm not fully sold into it yet. I do think that he and Beamer will be among those next two coaches that start to really climb the ranks as time moves on. A guy who I kind of think is stuck in the spot that he's going to be in, and the place that I don't really see him moving out of, is Mark Stoops, who comes in at number 7 on this list. And unfortunately for him, that top 6 is so difficult to get into, especially with one of the new guys that is featuring on this list. That I don't really see him moving much at all unless one of those guys retires at the very top, or I think it would take a lot for him to go up. And he's done a really good job at Kentucky. I think that he's been a very consistent name, and he's helped really make what is typically a basketball university care about football, which in and of itself is almost more impressive than some of the stuff that these other guys have managed to accomplish. But and he's just, there's something about it that doesn't really exude excellence. He's a very good head coach. Like, I don't think there's any debating that. He's not a bad head coach. He would be a very, very good head coach among the top of the top in most other conferences. Unfortunately, this one is so tied off at the very top that there's really no moving forward for Coach Stoops. And even his record's a little bit deceiving. He's in his last 6 seasons, he's only had one sub 500 year, which is incredible because he started off with 3 sub 500 years, and then in 2020 he went below 500. But beyond that, he's been just consistent 7-8 wins here and there. He's had a couple 10-win seasons now from last year, and then a couple years prior to that. But he's a really good coach. And I think that he gets a little bit disrespected in these lists, but it could also just be the perception of disrespect because where he's currently at is about as high as I believe he can go. So he's kind of, it's a bit complicated for him. And if you remember just a few minutes ago, I had mentioned that there was a coach that recently joined the SEC that I think really kind of pushes everybody else down and really causes some issues to enter that next level. And that's who we'll be talking about next, who is Brian Kelly for LSU. And while I do recognize that he's a really good coach and has a ton of wins under his belt and a ton of success in his history, this fit with LSU makes little to no sense to me, and I think it's going to fail, which is why I have him all the way at 6, because for the benefit of the doubt, I have to give him a little bit of a bump, if you will, top 6. I can't put him any lower than top 6. And even 6 is probably a little lower than most fans would like. But again, I don't really see this marriage and this arrangement working out well for the Tigers or for Coach Kelly. I think since he's arrived in Baton Rouge, he's been very disingenuous. And whenever it comes to recruiting in the South, I think your best bet is to be as genuine as possible. And the recruiting pitch that literally all these other schools will be able to bring, I think, are better than Brian Kelly's, not because of the situation or the lineage or, what have you, the location. I think because a lot of players can see whenever a coach is BSing them, and Brian Kelly it's not even like he's trying to hide the fact that he's BSing. Like, he comes out here with a fake Southern accent and he's doing all these things, and whenever you look back even further, it looks horrible the way he left Notre Dame, and the fact that barely any of his players followed him. And there's just, there's so much that just keeps piling up when you look at Brian Kelly. I don't think this is going to work, even though he's had a past of recruiting very well. He's now having to go up against all these monsters, and with or without the academic standards and with or without the academic requirements that Notre Dame had and LSU doesn't, you're still running an uphill battle. And even if you wanted to get your slice of the pie in that recruiting aspect of things, now you're both bringing a disingenuous pitch to them, and you're really in the deep waters with these big, powerful schools that can just out-recruit just about anybody else in the country. That's why we see so many SEC schools at that top 30-ish mark of recruiting. So Brian Kelly, that fit, I don't like. I think he's a bit overrated as a coach as is. Like, obviously, I can recognize how good he is, but the scheduling, and I know it's a tired and beaten, wore-out narrative, but the scheduling, there is no comparison between a typical Notre Dame schedule and an SEC football schedule. You're going to have to go through hell and back to win more than 6 games, 7 games. I don't know that I think Brian Kelly can do that. I don't know that he has the chops to survive in the Southeastern Conference. Somebody who, whenever they first came in, I really didn't think much of. I did not think that they would be able to stick it in the SEC, but they have turned my opinion on them around at a very sharp angle. Coach Sam Pittman for Arkansas, Pit Boss. He, if there's one thing that you cannot deny about Coach Pittman is that he knows how to get people to buy in, whether that be players or coaches or fans. Like, Arkansas football fans have known for a very long time prior to Coach Pittman, since Petrino, that Arkansas football was not made to be good. It's not in a particularly great state. I'm from the state of Arkansas. The sales pitch to get you to Arkansas over Tennessee and Georgia and South Carolina and all these places, it does not compare. Simply, Texas, you can throw that in there too. It's day and night. Like Arkansas Fayetteville's a great city, but that's not what people think of when they think of Arkansas. They think of like a lower way of life, and that's just kind of the natural perception of the state. But with Coach Pittman, he's somehow getting these guys in now. These very talented recruits to come to this state and get people to really buy in, and that's something that Arkansas has not had since Petrino. And it's weird to kind of comparing to that because they're day and night as far as individuals. Petrino was not the best of people, still isn't. Pittman, I've heard nothing but great things about Coach Pittman, but he is getting it to where these people believe that Arkansas football could mean something, and after that sharp turnaround that they just had, who's to say they can't go out there and win 8-9 games again and be really competitive and keep building up as time moves on. My primary fear, and I don't even know that I want to call it a fear with Pittman, but I am a bit worried that what happens when his coordinators leave. Now, granted, being able to hire good coordinators is a very important thing of being a head coach, and he did a wonderful job of that. Bringing in Coach Odom to lead your defense was a very good decision. Somebody who has been a head coach at the SEC level, used to be Missouri's head coach, and then he got this younger upstart from a very the child of a very prestigious head coach at one point in time, a very good offensive mind in Art Briles, Kendall Briles being his offensive coordinator. He figured out what he needed to have in a support system in his cabinet, if you will, and it's working out well for him. But what happens if Barry Odom, this next coaching carousel, gets a job at Northwestern or like somewhere that could feasibly take him a Power 5 school that he could finally leave for? What happens then with the defense? If Kendall Briles, somebody decides that they want to take a shot on him, I know Arkansas fans weren't exactly pleased with him last year, but he's got enough potential and enough name value, if you will, to become either a larger program's offensive coordinator or go become a head coach of his own. There's every chance in the world that could happen. So what happens when those guys leave? What's next for Coach Pittman? Can he keep filling up the coordinators with really talented guys and continue to have that strong support system around him? I don't know. And we're only 2 seasons into the Pittman project, so I can't for sure lock down that I think that he can do it or that I can't. But with how he's trended thus far, I think he is more suitable for the SEC and has a brighter SEC future. Granted, he's a little bit older, so that hurts it a little bit, but I think he's got a brighter SEC future than Jimbo Fisher. Or not Jimbo Fisher, but Brian Kelly. And I think it's relatively closer with Jimbo Fisher than you'd think. There's, Coach Stoops. I don't think he's limited like Coach Stoops is at Kentucky, where, there's a bit of a pecking order. And, Pittman's still so fresh right now that hitting that 9-win that early on into his SEC career is really promising to me. So just kind of how he's set himself up for the future, I really believe Coach Pittman is a top 5 SEC football coach. So number 4, I just mentioned him in comparison to futures in the SEC and what have you. We're talking about Jimbo Fisher now from Texas A&M, and while yes, he is a national champion, he has won a national championship at Florida State. What we've seen from him at Texas A&M does not really inspire me. It's, they take one step forward, they take another half step back, they regain their ground, and then they get pulled back yet again. He hasn't really established himself as a top-tier SEC football coach, and I don't really know where the ceiling is for him. I can't tell if he has the capabilities to become a contender in the SEC or if this second to third wave of teams is really where he's meant to be in the conference. Now, yes, he did just pull in the top recruiting class in the country. I get that. But to this point, from what we've seen from Texas A&M, why should that deter me from putting him lower on the list than these top 3 guys? I have no real reason to right now. I have not been given a whole lot of confidence that A&M is prepared to go jump up that next tier. And even when it looks like, hey, next year might be their year, they have stepped back. And something about Jimbo Fisher at A&M, I don't think he's a bad coach. I think with a lot of the guys on this list, if he went back to Florida State or he went wherever, he would be a top coach in the conference. But I don't think he's really SEC caliber or top tier SEC caliber. Of course, he can hold his own. If he goes 8-9 wins every year, that's not a bad coaching life, but it's certainly not great. And it leaves much to be desired, especially when you are a program like Texas A&M and a coach that has won a national championship like Jimbo Fisher. So that leaves us with 3 SEC head football coaches. And since we're getting off the topic of Jimbo Fisher, that means that the next guy that I have on this list, I believe, is better than him and has a brighter future in the SEC than him, which is very true. I believe Lane Kiffin has a brighter SEC football career than Jimbo Fisher does, a better SEC future than Jimbo Fisher does, than Brian Kelly does, than all these guys that are below him, because quite frankly, Lane Kiffin is not afraid to go into that next venture of football, and he's already reinvented himself. Obviously, he needed a little bit of soul searching, a little bit of recalibration, if you will, once he left once he got fired from USC, and he went and learned with Coach Saban, and he went to FAU and kind of rebuilt his brand. And now that we've gotten to this point of him being at Ole Miss, and we now know how willing he is to win by going into the transfer portal and getting all of these players, I truly believe that he is the 3rd best coach in the SEC. So, of course, he's got time on his side where a lot of these guys do not. A lot of these coaches are older or more established. Lane Kiffin has both experience and is still young and has kind of become a new version of himself, one that I don't want to say deserves, but has earned more trust from fans, whether that be Ole Miss fans or from different teams that might potentially want to hire him as a head coach down the line, because we now know that he is willing to go that extra mile and recreate and rebrand himself. And that's exactly what he's done at Ole Miss. And the real tell here on how crazy or delusional I am, or if I'm not crazy or delusional at all, is if he comes in with Jackson Dart and all these new guys that he just brought in, Zach Evans and all the new rebels, if you will. If he goes 8 wins, 9 wins, maybe, if you want to throw the bowl game in there, I think immediately that shows, wait a minute, so not only can he use the transfer portal well and get all these talented players in, but he can go out here after he's lost a ton of players and fix it back up brand new, good to go. And next year they go 10 wins or whatever it is. If he can come in there and do that, I mean, I think that's 100% established my point, because he's not going out here and getting the top ranked recruiting class in the country. He's just going out there, finding the guys he needs to do it, and wins. It's not, or he's not having to throw NIL money at these guys to get them to come in, or whatever the case may be. So Lane Kiffin is a top 3 SEC football coach for me until further notice. If he takes a big step back this year, then obviously I can't really justify it in a sense, but that's not really what I think. I think they've got 8 wins in the regular season coming up. So for number 2, we've got Kirby Smart, and the only reason I'm not, trying to elongate this or really draw it out is because we know who number 1 is. Kirby Smart would absolutely be number 1. He would be number 1 in literally every other conference besides the ACC, and that would even be a 1A, 1B situation. But number 1 is the greatest college football coach of all time. So Kirby Smart, not to just gloss over him because he absolutely deserves his respect, he has managed to make a school a powerhouse in the SEC while Alabama and Nick Saban are still going. He's now a national champion while Nick Saban and Alabama are still going. He's putting guys in the NFL constantly, almost to match what Nick Saban and Alabama have done, maybe not to the same extent, but there's so much that he has done for Georgia at this point, Kirby Smart has, that to just gloss over him and more or less disrespect him and just, oh well, this is number 2, let's get to Nick Saban, that wouldn't be right on me. So yeah, Kirby Smart is number 2 on this list, and that's only because Nick Saban is a living legend. It's Nick Saban at the end of the day. Like, if you click this video being like, oh, I wonder who's going to be number one in like a serious way, I would advise you to watch more SEC football, because Nick Saban is number one in the country, in the history books, in the SEC, in Alabama, in, whatever you want, whatever criteria, Nick Saban is at the top of that. He's been far too good for far too long. He hasn't really slowed down much of any. Looks like this year will probably be another national championship for him. He's incredible. He is absolutely incredible, and he will remain at the top until he decides he wants to retire, and there's really no argument to be had about it. So how would you change this list around? Who will, like, let's say you think I'm disrespecting Mike Leach. Would you move Mike Leach up to 6 or 7 or whatever? Or Brian Kelly, would you move him into a top 4 position? Feel free to let me know down in the comments section below. But for now, that is episode 24 of the From My Perspective podcast. Make sure to subscribe, and as always, I'll see you next time.